Okay, good morning. Great to see all of you. Thank you for coming today. So this coming Thursday is Thanksgiving, and normally before Thanksgiving we always give a message about gratitude, but many of you may remember that just a little while ago I gave a message on gratitude, and I felt like it was a little bit too soon to do another one. And so I was thinking about what to talk about, and so I thought it would be actually good for me to learn a little bit more about this holiday called Thanksgiving, because I really didn't know much about it. And my experience with Thanksgiving is mostly, probably like a lot of you, get together with family, have good food, be thankful, right? Have Thanksgiving, as a lot of people say. So one thing that was kind of interesting for me to get some context on this was that my wife and I were in Iceland recently, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about the history of Iceland. So one of the things that we did was we went to a Viking museum. And interestingly enough, in Iceland, it's a very small country in terms of population. There's only about 350,000 people. So it's kind of the size of basically kind of a medium-sized town in maybe Fort Collins or something like that. But it's a full-fledged country, you know, with all the resources and industry and everything. And there's museums all over the place, lots of museums. They're really proud of, or at least very interested in sharing about their history. So we went to the Viking Museum, and in the Viking Museum, we got to learn about the kind of ancient history of Iceland. And it was a very interesting experience because the history of Iceland starts off with a bunch of Vikings came to Iceland, and half of the women of the Vikings were from Ireland. So they didn't specifically say this, but I'm assuming what they mean by that is that the Vikings stopped at Ireland, pillaged, and took a bunch of Irish women as wives, 50% of the women that were part of their group, and then settled in Iceland together. So it's kind of an interesting start of a country in a sense. But as you go through the history of the Vikings and the early settlements there, a lot of it is just, here I got a picture, I think. Yeah, it's a lot of kind of what you would expect from the stereotypical understanding of the Vikings. Lots of fighting, and this person killed this person, and this person killed that person, and there's of course other things there too, but and I know that, and I also recognize a lot of countries kind of have this history as well, especially the further back you go. But at the same time, at the end of the museum, I was a little bit depressed. You know, you go through this whole guided tour and you learn about the history, and then it's a lot of bloodshed. And then you finish, and I'm like, okay, it's great. So I mean, I'm sure a lot of things have happened since then to develop the country. But coming back to America, in some ways, it was a little bit sad leaving the Icelandic culture. It's a very safe culture. It's a very, I guess, monocultural society. They have like 1.5 murders every year, they said, something like that. Amazing. So there were many things that I felt sad to leave there. When you go to Iceland, all the parents, they let their children play in the playground or whatever, and they come home at like 11 o'clock at night, no big deal, you know, but can't imagine doing something like that here. Maybe if you live in a small town somewhere out there where it's super, super safe, but it's just not really a part of our culture anymore to do that. But there are some things that I really appreciated about our culture coming back too, because one of the things about Iceland is that even though they're a Christian country, technically, like they converted to Christianity 1,030 years ago or something. No, 1,019 years ago. They converted to Christianity at 1000 AD. But there's not really much religion in the country. And some of the things that I think that I take for granted, for example, that are still embedded into our culture. For example, our money, saying, in God we trust, and God kind of permeating our society still to this day is something actually really comforting to me, even though I see it kind of disappearing over time. So I started to look into what is Thanksgiving a little bit from that perspective. What is the deeper meaning of Thanksgiving beyond just the spending time as a family, eating some turkey, things like that. And even though we have a lot of problems in our history and our society, there was certain things that I really could resonate with, and actually want to share with you part of the declaration from Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln actually established Thanksgiving as a federal holiday for the first time, universally practiced on the same day all throughout the country. And he did this actually during the Civil War. Right in the middle of all the war and the strife and the conflict and the bloodshed of the Civil War, he established a Thanksgiving. And so I want to share just a brief excerpt from that, which I thought was really beautiful. Here we go. He says, "I do therefore invite my fellow citizens in every part of the United States, and also those who are at sea and those who are sojourning in foreign lands, to set aside and observe the last Thursday of November next as a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens. And I recommend to them that while offering up the ascriptions justly due to him for such singular deliverances and blessings, they do also with humble penitence for our national perverseness and disobedience commend to him tender care for all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife in which we are unavoidably engaged, and fervently implore the interposition of the Almighty hand to heal the wounds of the nation and to restore it as soon as may be consistent with the divine purposes to the full enjoyment of peace, harmony, tranquility, and union." Abraham Lincoln, 1863. So there's more to the proclamation, but I found it really interesting that he doesn't really talk about the things that we normally celebrate in Thanksgiving. He doesn't talk about turkeys. He doesn't talk about gathering as families. He's talking about healing the country, and also as a day of Thanksgiving, not just for like abundance of food, which is something that we should be grateful for, no doubt, and the things that we have, the material things that we have, and the spiritual things that we have, but also just a thankfulness to God for everything that we have, for all of our blessings. And that was kind of like the main point. I thought that was really interesting. So I want to share part of one of my favorite speeches that you may or may not have read or heard. Probably most of you have. But it's from the speech called God's Hope for America that our founder, Reverend Moon, gave in 1973. And this was soon after he came to America, and he was talking about the American spirit. And it relates a lot with Thanksgiving, and it's a little bit long, but please try your best to follow along with me, and I hope you find it meaningful. America must have seemed attractive to those who were dreaming of a new world. Even though America was unknown territory, it promised them the freedom of worship they craved. The Puritans felt a strong desire to create a community of their own. America seemed an ideal place, so they made the courageous decision to venture there. They committed themselves to the treacherous journey across the Atlantic. They risked their very lives, finding strength in their faith, which was stronger than life itself. Think of it. They had to give up their families, their relatives, their surroundings, and their country, and head toward an unknown land. Their only hope was in God. Every step they took, they depended on God. Their journey was long, and there were many storms. They prayed unceasingly to God. They had but one way to turn. They turned to God. When they were sick and dying on the voyage, they had no medicine to take, no doctor to care for them. They turned to God. Those pilgrim men and women were one with God, and that is how they survived. Put yourself in their position of total reliance on God. What a wonderful faith. I am sure that the faith of the Pilgrim Fathers touched the heart of God. And when God is moved, he offers promises. And when he makes promises, he will fulfill them. God determined to give these faithful people the ultimate thing they wanted, freedom of worship. He then determined to give them even more. I am sure you know, as I have learned, that the Mayflower arrived at Plymouth Rock in New England almost in the dead of winter. November in New England is rather cold. The destiny of the newcomers could have been only starvation because there was so little food to eat. Given this fact, it really inspires me to learn that the store of grain in the hold of the Mayflower, which they would not touch, about the store of grain in the hold of the Mayflower, which they would not touch, even though they were starving to death. They preserved this grain for planting the next spring. This was truly a supreme example of sacrifice. They preferred to die in hoping in tomorrow rather than to act in desperation for only a few more days of life. The pilgrims came to this land full of purpose and hope. They knew that this purpose of theirs was more important than preserving their own lives. Nothing could have given them this kind of courage, this kind of dedication, this kind of sacrificial spirit, except their faith in God. When they arrived at Plymouth, the 41 men who had survived the voyage got together and organized their ideas for government. The resulting Mayflower Compact was signed in the name of God. Amen. This is really a wonderful story. This little group of people left Europe with their hopes set in God. They grew sick and died in God. They survived in God. They formed their first government and signed their official papers in the name of God. The story of the Pilgrim Fathers is one of a kind in God's history. It fits into the pattern of the righteous people of history, such as Abraham, Isaac, and Moses. These pilgrims were the Abrahams of modern history. They therefore had to brave many hardships even after the Mayflower Compact was signed. During the first winter of America, the population of the hardy Mayflower survivors was cut in half. Each day that winter brought a heartbreaking separation from loved ones. One by one, these courageous pioneers died. Yet their life from morning to night, from dusk to dawn, was centered upon the will of God. God was their only comfort, their only hope, and their only security. God was the principal partner for them. Here was an example of such a rare and pure group of God's people. They demonstrated untiring faith, and God gave them power and courage. They never lost their trust in God and their vision of the future. Their purpose in coming to America was to build a nation where God could dwell, and where they could really share fellowship with each other and rejoice in fellowship with God. This was all in God's providence, because he needed a nation to serve as his champion for the ultimate and permanent salvation of the world. So another miracle came to the pilgrims. When they were just barely surviving and their population had been halved, the Indians could have easily wiped them out with one stroke. But again, God was a shield for them. The first group of Indians the Mayflower survivors encountered were not hostile. The Indians welcomed the settlers. If the pilgrims had been destroyed at that time, there probably would have been no America for God. God intervened to save his people here in America. This is my belief. God wanted them to settle, and he gave the pilgrims a chance. This continent of America was hidden away for a special purpose and was not discovered until the appropriate hour. The people of God came at the appointed hour. They came to mold the new way of life. Their principal partner was God. At home, in caring for their children, in farming or cooking or building, they let God share their work. He was the only security they had. A farmer might talk to his son, working out in the field with him. Let's plow this field in the name of God. Their everyday life was lived in the name of God. After the first spring visited them, they cleared the fields, planted, cultivated, and harvested the crop. And they attributed all their precious grace to the harvest to the grace of God. The beautiful tradition of Thanksgiving thus originated. Following the next severe winter, the first thing they built was a church. At night, at dawn, in the morning, and at noontime, they prayed to God. I am sure they prayed, God, we want to build a place for you, which must be better than the old world. We want to build a place where you can dwell and be master. And they also had a vision of the future that this Christian nation would do more good for the rest of the world than any other country upon the face of the earth. I am sure that after their church, they built the school. They wanted outstanding schools for their children, better than any schools existing in the old world, and their homes came last. After they built these homes, they dedicated them to God. This is the history of the Pilgrim Fathers I know. I can visualize early America as a beautiful America because God was dwelling everywhere. In the school, in the church, in the kitchen, in the street, in any assembly or marketplace, God was dwelling. America is a unique nation. Even your money, the bills and coins, are impressed with such a beautiful inscription. In God we trust. No other nation does such a thing. Then whose money is it? Your money? Is it American money? No, it is God's money. Every bill or coin says so. You are the stewards, and God has deposited his wealth in your hands. Yes, this nation is not the American nation, it is God's nation. And such a nation exists for the entire world, not just for America herself. Yes, America was formed as a new nation, a new Christian nation under a new tradition. The shackles of old traditions fell away in America. You must want to build a new nation under God. God's purpose is the salvation of the world and all mankind. Today in America, therefore, you must not think that you have such wealth because you yourselves are great. We must humbly realize that the blessing of God came to America with the purpose of making it possible for God to use this nation as his instrument in saving the world. If America betrays God, where can God go? If America rejects God, where can God go to fulfill his aim? Whew. Yes, let's give a hand. Anyway, the actual speech is much longer. It was really worth the read if you want to read it. God's Hope for America. So I couldn't imagine that I could top that, but I have a few words about it. Like I said, normally we think about Thanksgiving and we think about family and turkey and food and gratitude, which are obviously really important and good things. And normally when we give a Thanksgiving sermon, we talk about gratitude. But I think that after reading this, as I was preparing for the message, I couldn't help but reflect on my own life. I couldn't help but reflect on how amazing these people must have been. Now, in some ways, I think we make more effort to reach out to God when we're in times of crisis, right? When we are in a situation in our life where we feel like things are out of our hands. We have no control. It could be illness. It could be tragedy. It could just be looking at the situation of the world. Or it could be some crisis happening in our own lives. And I think to some degree it's natural that when we are confronted with those situations that we reach out to God because we don't have any other options sometimes. And so in a way, the Pilgrims were in a situation where they had to reach out to God. There was no other, that was the whole reason they were there. There was no other option for them. And so in our own life, we don't experience crisis on a daily basis, right? We're not, maybe some of you do. Maybe some of you are experiencing a crisis in your life right now. So you're actually experiencing this desire or drive to find some comfort or find some direction from God. I don't know. But I know that for myself, it's not always like that. Sometimes we're in a time of crisis. Sometimes we're in a time of desperation. But sometimes life just kind of goes. And we go through life. We work. We do the things that we do. We have routines. And there doesn't seem to be much need for God in my life. But I think that the beautiful thing about the story from this speech of the Pilgrim Fathers was that, yes, they were at a difficult time and they reached out to God. But what kind of a foundation that created for including God into all aspects of society from that point on. Father said that if the Pilgrim Fathers had died, there probably would be no America for God. Now, there still would have been in America, right? Just like all these other countries that were created for different reasons. Some countries was just people looking for expansion, new land, maybe division between clans, all kinds of reasons why new countries have appeared over the years. But what kind of a country would it have been? God was needing a country that he could call his own, that he could do something with. And I think that in that way, some things haven't changed. God still needs people. God still needs families. God still needs communities that he can use to do his will. God has to work through people. You know, as much as we tend to think of God as some, almighty, all-powerful being that just does his thing regardless of what we do as his children, God has to work through people. God works through our own efforts. God is able to be a part of our lives as much as we desire for him to be there. And so it made me reflect on my life, and I was asking myself, this was about a week ago, right? And we had come back from Iceland, and then as soon as we got back from Iceland, I had to fly to Washington, D.C. for our leaders meeting, and then I got back Saturday night, and then we had church the next day, and I'll be honest with you, I was like done. I was really done, and I just wanted, like last week, I just wanted Sunday to be over and to be able to have some downtime. But actually, when I was reading this speech, I actually had to, I don't know, I was reading about the life of the pilgrims and how they invited God into their lives. God, let's plow the field together. I thought about my life and how much on a daily basis am I bringing God into my life? Or God, how much are we bringing God into our family? How much do we thank God for the things that we have, even the challenges that we experience in our lives? How much do we thank God for the people in our lives? Yeah, I know some people, hard to get along with, maybe it's kind of we wish we didn't have them in our lives. But I think that all of us here have people in our lives to be truly grateful for. And even those people that we don't get along with, there's a lot to be grateful for those people as well. How much do I wake up in the morning and the first thought on my mind is about God? Or do I just wake up and I start my routine? Or I check out my phone. Oh, did I get any new emails? Anything new happen on social media? Or something like that. It could be really easy to fall into a secular life, even as religious people, even as people who believe in God. But I think that this is really a trap of the religious life, because we can believe in God, but then it doesn't actually permeate our life. It doesn't actually affect the way we live, the habits that we have, the thoughts that we partake in, and the things that we say, and the way that we act, and the way that we live, and the way that we relate to other people. And I think this is a huge problem. So in Iceland, one of the things, we went to a Viking church. It was really cool. And I was really curious about the religious history of Iceland, because basically in 1000 AD, they converted to Christianity, sort of. And then, so there's a Lutheran. So the Lutheran church is like the common church in Iceland. But in the last, 20 years, kind of like here in America, there's been a number of really high-level scandals in the Lutheran church. The Lutheran bishops and whatnot had problems with money, had problems with women. There was a lot of scandals. And so a lot of the people in Iceland, maybe they still call themselves Lutherans, but a lot of people have really distanced themselves from the church and religious life, and I think in some ways God. And we've seen the same thing happen here. And so one of the things that I think has really caused a lot of the breakdown for a lot of people in terms of our convictions in God and convictions in truth and religion has been this point about religious people not living, not being in integrity with the values that we hold that we're supposed to hold. And it was a reminder to me that being a person that believes in God, it's not enough to just say, I believe in something. We have to be willing to make the effort to mold my life and to mold my character, my actions, and my habits into what kind of a person God would want me to be a godly person, to be a person that God could use, to be his, to use a kind of a common phrase, his hands and feet in this world. Otherwise, if we're not trying to do that, then we're in a way showing the opposite of what religion is to the people of this world. To be people who say, oh, I believe in God, but then that it doesn't actually affect the way we live our life is, there's a word I'm looking for, the opposites. Contradiction, okay, sorry. Contradiction is fine. So I felt inspired. This is the point I want to leave you with. I felt inspired this Thanksgiving to practice bringing God more fully into my life, to think about how am I living my life in a way that brings God in. How do I start my day? What do I think about when I'm benefiting from the abundance of my life, when I'm eating, when I'm driving my car, when I'm, being with my family? Anytime I do anything, am I thinking about God, or am I just living my life? And so the thing that I would like to leave you with is that this Thanksgiving, of course, let's be grateful. Of course, let's practice thanks. But let's also remember that the original purpose for Thanksgiving was not just to be thankful, but it was to recognize God at the center of all things. At least that's where I think that he should be. And to find out, how can I practice that more in my life? How can I bring God more into my relationship with my family, my husband, my wife, my children, my parents? How can I bring God more into my daily life? It doesn't mean that we have to become monkish, or like priests, but it takes that extra effort. And I think that makes a big difference. I think it makes a big difference for us. I think it makes a big difference for God as well, that he knows that there's a welcome place for him in our lives. So with that, I'd like to close in prayer. Good morning, Heavenly Parent. Thank you for this beautiful Sunday morning as we are getting ready to jump into the holiday season and the end of the year, which is coming so quickly, Heavenly Parent. I really pray that we can think about and reflect on how much effort we have made to include you in our lives. We know that your love and your presence is always there, but you're also waiting eagerly for us to make the effort to include you into our lives, Heavenly Parent. We know that you are a loving God and that you're there. And sometimes it can be really easy to get caught up in the day-to-day life. We get so busy with so many different things. And it's easy to forget that you're even there. Easy to forget that you have a purpose in this world, that you have a purpose for our lives, that maybe more than our own plans for our own lives, Heavenly Parent. And we want to acknowledge that. We want to bring that into our lives. Heavenly Parent, we want to experience a closeness with you. there are so many problems in this world and so many challenges that people face. I pray that we can be the people who, as we live our lives, we can mold ourselves to become like you, so that we can not just be bystanders of this world and allow for evil things to happen, but that we can participate in doing your will, that we can participate in making it better, that we can participate in loving your children. Heavenly Parent, thank you for allowing us to be in a country with such a noble roots, even though we have there's been a lot of things that need to be fixed, a lot of problems. We're grateful to be able to be in a country that you are a part of so many different areas and parts of our society, Heavenly Parent. I pray that we can make it more so, at the very least starting in our own lives and in our families. I pray that going forward this week, that you can be with every single person, every single family. Please guide us. Please guide our community, Heavenly Parent, so we can discover the plan that you have for our lives, and that we can also discover more and more gratitude and thankfulness as well. And I offer this prayer in my name, Michael and Adonia Hentrick, a blessed Central family. Amen and Aju. Thank you.